Last year, I followed my boyfriend to his summer internship across country. I didn't have many job prospects myself, given it was a rather economically depressed area. So after applying to some minimum wage jobs and coming up with nothing but a telecom company, which I found way too depressing to entertain, I got on a caregiving website to find a family I could nanny for. After a bit of searching, I found a family who needed weekday care for their two toddler-aged boys, and I went to their house to meet them for an interview the following day. The Smiths lived in a typical middle-class suburb, and as I turned onto their driveway, I saw the two adorable boys playing in the front yard with their parents. They were the epitome of an all-American family. The parents, John and Sarah, were in their early 30s, a nice, easygoing couple, and the boys were sweet, so I instantly had zero qualms about working for them. During our meeting, they described the boys' schedules, eating habits, my chores, and the like, and then they told me about Ben. Ben was an old friend and retired war vet who lived in a side room off the kitchen. It was on the opposite side of the house from the other bedrooms. They said he'd fallen on hard times and had been living with them the last few years while he got back on his feet. They understood it seemed a bit strange, and went out of their way to explain how John had known him for years, and he was basically a part of the family at this point, so he could be completely trusted. Alright. I mean, it was still kind of weird, but these people were doing a compassionate thing for their friend, right? At that moment, I decided to take them at their word, and not be too creeped out by Ben. I started working for them the next week, and didn't meet Ben until about 3 days in. I was getting ready to leave after Sarah returned home from work at the same time as him. She introduced us, and he simply said hello in a low voice, then averted eye contact when I said hello back and offered my hand. After quickly shaking it, he immediately turned his attention to the 1-year-old, giving me a cursory, "Nice to meet you," which I returned before making my exit while chatting with Sarah. Nothing about the interaction seemed too off to me, except I'd wondered if I'd offended him somehow since he seemed rather cagey around me. I just took him as being generally shy or nervous around young women, or something like that. Whatever. As the summer went on, I didn't see too much of Ben at all. He left for work between 8 to 10 a.m. most days, and he'd usually return home for lunch, but I rarely saw him. If I did, he'd just offer a nod and return immediately to his quarters. Sometimes I'd see him outside in the yard doing yard work. Once he came to get me, as I hadn't left enough room for his car to back out, and that was pretty much my longest interaction with him, to my knowledge at least. One day, as the boys napped, I was swiffering the house, and although I wasn't responsible for Ben's room, I knew he wasn't home, and I was curious about how a man like him lived. I cleaned what I could of it as well. Upon entering, I saw a room akin to a college-age male's space. Most surfaces were covered with trash or clothing, and his bed had no sheets on it, just clothes on one side. On his desk was a 3-monitor computer with the desktop on and the File Explorer open, so as a generally nosy person, I was tempted to click around a bit. My conscience got the best of me, though. This is one time in my life I'm glad I wasn't a snoopy bitch. To fast forward a bit, I continued working for their family without much event for the rest of the summer, and I really did enjoy my time with them. Working for them was once a pleasant memory in my mind. That is, until 2 weeks ago, when I got a call from Sarah. I had no clue what she could be calling me about, as I had stopped working for them in August and returned to school. Perhaps to catch up? I didn't think it'd be anything like this. Sarah's voice trembled and eventually broke as she described to me what had just happened to them. Apparently a few hours earlier, the FBI had busted into their home, booted them out, ransacked it, and informed them that Ben not only had shitloads of child pornography on his computer, but he'd also installed secret cameras all over their house, which he was using to watch all of us. I was in a state of utter shock and horror upon hearing this. I don't remember how I responded, but she wouldn't stop apologizing to me for subjecting me to such a gross violation, which of course I accepted, because how the fuck could she have known? Then she informed me I was going to be contacted by the authorities to give my statement about any odd experiences I'd had with Ben, and that I could ask them any questions I had about the case. When we hung up, I immediately thought about how I almost looked through his computer, and very likely could have discovered his crimes. After that, feeling sick to my stomach, I screamed into a pillow for a while and took a long shower, attempting to get his disgusting pedophilic voyeur stink off of me. It didn't really help, and I cried myself to sleep that night wondering if he'd ever hurt those little boys I'd been watching, and questioning if I could have ever done something about it. A few days later, I was contacted by a Homeland Security agent. I don't know why both agencies were working on it, and he asked me a ton of questions about Ben. I told him what little information I had, but that I'd never knowingly experienced any abuse from him at all. He then told me about the extent of Ben's crimes. Thankfully, they had no video evidence that Ben had ever harmed the boys, and his crimes only revolved around females. But in addition to the hidden cameras, apparently he sometimes upped the ante by creeping around outside the house, taking stealthy pictures of us through the windows. Was he ever really doing yard work? Not only that, but during one of the few times I napped when the boys did, he snuck into the living room where I laid on the couch and had a whole photo shoot of me sleeping, consisting of dozens of shots, some right in my face. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, the sick fuck also had an entire folder dedicated to when I used the bathroom. Sarah, however, he captured naked all the time, and apparently she was the main focal point of his disturbed attention. There's more, but he told me that was all that was pertinent to my situation, and I opted not to learn any more about it. I already felt too overwhelmed. Having never been the victim of a serious sex crime before, I'm still figuring out how to handle all of this and move past it. Beyond myself, though, I'm disgusted that such kind, wonderful people were able to be hurt like this. To basically be fucking stalked in your own home by a close friend. I can't imagine how you'd ever get over that huge violation of trust. It chills me to my core. I was visiting my friends in my hometown in Arizona a couple of months back. Just a girls' day at Selena's and Kara's apartment, listening to dubstep, gossiping, and enjoying a good old 3-bong rotation. Flashback to earlier in the day. I'm driving with my friend Blanca to grab food around the corner from S&C's place, when Bree points out the man waiting for the crosswalk on the corner. He's wearing a red pullover, dark jeans with unkempt facial hair, and an all-over dirty appearance. He was young-looking, college-aged even. B goes on to say, "Oh my god, that's S&C's stalker." Why was this the first time I had heard of this? "Well, we know you'd try to go blow the dude's balls off or something, and that you would be worried for them," she says. You're damn right, I'm that friend. With both parents being federal agents, I've been trained to be aware of everything, especially as a small female, and know what to do in multiple situations. To say I'd be sitting on the roof like a sniper waiting for him is somewhat accurate. I make eye contact with the stalker as I round the corner, looking at him in my rear-view mirrors, and I'd never been luckier that I paid attention. We head back to the apartment where Selena and Kara tell me more about their stalker once I brought up that I definitely knew what was going on. In summary, they tell me that they've seen him on their college campus nearby multiple times. Around the library, around their sorority house, and even standing near their apartment when they came home from a movie early in the morning. Yeah, I'd say he was definitely stalking them. He appeared at these locations on several accounts, too. We continue to hang out, and now it's around 6 p.m. as the sun set. Their apartment has one mediocre light outside the door, and you can't see shit through the peephole. Someone knocks on the door at this point. My eyes shoot up to make sure it's locked. We're good. I look around and all the girls are sitting there in the living room. Don't answer. Everyone's already here, I say. Always best to be hesitant to open the door. We're not expecting anyone, and no one else needed to be there. I go to the peephole, where I found out the light was shit. I turn back to the girls in the living room and say, "It looks like a dude. I can't really tell. Maybe it could be two?" I return to my seat because, like I mentioned, the gang's all here. "Selena, I love you, but Jesus, you could have ended our lives with your next action." She opens the door, not cracked, not slightly, but all the way. We're all sitting within view from, guess who? The stalker in the red pullover. He stares into S's eyes and says, "You love me, huh?" She reaches back to slam the door, and I see him begin to lunge. Thankfully, she closed it in time, as Carl runs up to help secure the locks. I grab B's hand and instruct the other girls to move away from the door towards the kitchen walls. You never know what could be on the other side. Bullets could fly through at any moment. He slams his hands on the door in a giving up fashion, and eventually leaves. Obviously the police are called, and he shows up and asks for a description. All of my friends look at each other and have no idea what to say besides the red sweatshirt, because they weren't really looking at him or trying to get a description. I give the officer a description based off of seeing him earlier. I knew that gut feeling to catch a longer view in my car mirror was for a reason. I call my mom to come escort us to our cars parked across the street. She shows up, practically guns blaring, as she sees someone gathering up items in the distance. A sleeping bag, plastic bags, a water jug. She shines her flashlight to him, and his eyes glare up like a deer in a dark forest. I've never seen someone run that quickly. Her yelling, "You better run, you sick fuck!" That was one of the highlights. Now the story takes a sad turn here. The girls tell me that the cops couldn't do much as the stalker hadn't really done anything. You know, that whole thing. About 3 weeks following, Selena texts me saying that she's at a party and the stalker showed up. He was just hanging around outside, and she apologized to her friends, but she needed to inform the police because it was a dangerous situation. You can't play with this kind of shit. I guess the cops made a report about it, but it wasn't until a female security guard at S&C's apartment complex was raped and assaulted. When she described the man, it was the same fucker who came to the door and matched what I had stated in the report. Mom just searched his file the other day. He was awaiting trial with a female judge who doesn't play, in the words of my mother, and will definitely remain in prison. I hope he rots every day, and the Diana tattoo on his neck, written in his description, creeps me out to the max. Be careful, ladies and gentlemen. Always be aware, and if something doesn't seem right, that's because it's probably not. This takes place in October 1977. When my mom was 16, she ran away from her abusive home, along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked from Mass all the way to California. Obviously, this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mom's tumultuous home life and past experiences, she didn't see how it could be much more dangerous than anything she'd already seen. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends and many truck drivers and other travelers. It wasn't until they reached California when this encounter happens. The hillside strangler, at first thought to be one assailant, ended up being 2 men who were caught and brought to justice for 10 different murders. So my mom and Lisa ended up meeting these 2 guys who were super nice to them. They crashed at their place for a few days partying, but nothing bad had come of it at that point. These guys tell the girls that they're going to take them to the Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see the sights. Not being from the area, my mom had no idea that these areas were more crime-ridden at the time, especially considering they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mom really wanted to see where all the movie stars lived. These guys take my mom and her friend to some divey restaurant/bar and get them super drunk. It's also the first time my mom is introduced to and tries cocaine. After these underage girls are now completely drunk and high, they split off into pairs, and my mom's friend disappears with one of the men. My mom is now hanging out with just one of her new guy friends. He then suggests that they stand on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night, and if/when a car pulls up, she should get in and direct the driver to drive across the street to this dark parking lot. It isn't really until the first and only car pulls up and she gets in that she realized the guy is prostituting her out, basically. Keep in mind these guys have been nothing but kind and respectful to my young mom and friend for the past few days, and very sadly, this type of abuse is not a new concept for her either. She gets into this car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, the man keeps driving straight. My mom explains that he's gone the wrong way, but he just starts driving faster. My mom moves towards the door, but he locks it, hits her, and attempts to hold her down at the same time. He yells at her that she's not going anywhere. My mom knew in her head that she needed to get out of that car, or she'd be dead. So in one swift move, she unlocks the door, tucks and rolls out of the car. His car comes to a screeching halt. She sees some bushes in front of a house, so she runs to hide behind them. He's turned around, looking for her, creeping along. His passenger side was facing where she was hiding, and she was peeking through the bushes. She saw that he had a gun. As soon as his car crept by, she ran to the backyard, but it was all fenced in. There was no other way out, so she had to go back the way she came. By the time she had crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw his car had gone to the end of the road and turned back around. He passes again, and when she thought he was far enough away, she crawled out of the bushes to run. Then she sees his brake lights light up. Confident that he's now seen her, she just runs as fast as possible around a corner. She could hear his car, so she had to duck behind some parked cars on the road. As soon as he passes again, she booked it across the street, which took her through the parking lot she was originally supposed to park in, and back to her friend. The creep did circle back again, but by then she was with her friend and they were leaving the area. My mom and her friend quickly ditched those two assholes, and did find a safer place to stay. But only a short time later, my mom called home and eventually made it there safely. It wasn't until a long time later that she saw on the news a story about women being murdered, and recognized the murderer, dubbed the Hillside Strangler, as the man who had picked her up that night. A side note, my mom literally just dictated this story to me. I've heard it before, but not in so much detail. I told her about the sub and she said she would share it. Not purposefully, but I googled an image of the Hillside Strangler and showed her, unexpectedly. My phone and she jumped so high. It actually really unnerved her recognizing him again, and I feel kind of bad about that. A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on a great American road trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that to save a ton of money we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut one of them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we'd gotten so we could set up camp in about 10 minutes. Luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites, rest areas, basically anywhere it seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night after the first night where we felt scared, until the last week of the trip in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff, and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule, and would never drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. No destination really in mind outside of a few must-see landmarks. We'd drive to places we found the night before on Google, and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we'd meet. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite in the back of their pickup, because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us the line dance at a country bar. Hope you're still kicking, Grandpa Mac. Played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm. Got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them. Spent 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite, and the grandma gave us some weed candy. Basically every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked, and 2 cars further up into the trees. We pulled up near the RV and a man opened the door. Tez waved hello, and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she hadn't said anything at all, he just closed the door slowly, staring at us the entire time. Figuring he just wanted some privacy and thought we'd be obnoxious, we pulled further down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual route of setting up camp immediately while it was still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out a campfire further down the campsite, and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks just by going up and offering beer or chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campfire there were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly, and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking, and we sat down and had beer. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that the 2 of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning around in circles and talking about UFOs. However, he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, families, and everything. And then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him, and he pulled out his camera to show her photos of the bear. It looked very close to the campsite, and we both got a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow suddenly cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh or for him to nudge Tez with his elbow. Jokes on the foreigner and the city girl, right? But he never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well, and joked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes the ranger had come back to it, and was talking about something grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he just kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point, and was staring into the stars, not talking. We just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer, and try to get the conversation going to somewhere else. The ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point it's pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside of the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside of the circle. Suddenly there's a red dot in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realize that it was a camera. The ranger was holding a camera. He'd taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera light up. Now, it wasn't odd for people we'd met to ask to take pictures with us. My friend Tez is gorgeous. Dark hair, blue eyes, like a young Megan Fox, and we were pretty friendly. People like having pictures of themselves. It was an entirely different, strange thing to have this man take a photo of us without asking, or even indicating that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in the headlights at this point, but instead of realizing that what he was doing was a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some settings, and takes another photo, this time with the flash. Not asking us to smile, no proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo, he comes back to the fire and sits down. Not a word about the photo taking. At this point, Tez and I are mutually freaked out. We make up some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite, and dope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says to have a good night. The ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and says, Be careful out there. There's more than bears in these woods. Every hair on my body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either, because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rushed back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jumped in the front seats. My friend Tez is all but hyperventilating. Why did he take pictures of us? I was shaking, but I responded. I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims. She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. Do you think he just took victim photos of us? We both freaked out. She's in a full panic and turns the headlights on in the car. I immediately yell at her to turn them off, because now he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that's the only night we didn't set up camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just put the car in drive and floored it out of the campsite. As we pulled onto the dirt road, we could see the ranger was walking towards our car with that same cold expression.